Sudan. Just as bad as Gaza, but no one cares. The UN claims that 20 million people have been displaced in Sudan in the recent conflict. 1 in 5 people is running from their home in fear. The limited footage I've seen is bombed and bullet-riddled buildings, devastation. The fighting's destroyed critical infrastructure, severely hampered agriculture, blocked the delivery of crucial aid, and half the population of Darfur is facing acute hunger. Long-time autocrat Bashir was ousted in 2019 after popular protests. There was a transition to civilian rule that followed, but it was derailed in 2021 when a coup led by Generals Burhan and Daglo put a stop to that. Well, 15 months ago, the two generals fell out and have been fighting ever since. They're not fighting for the good of the people, they're fighting for the wads of money. Somalia, Sudan, South Sudan, and Central African Republic have been named as the most dangerous countries in the world by international SOS. Gaza's not on that list. Yeah, for all the column inches and hundreds of thousands calling for an end of Israeli action in Gaza, often before it even started, there's little mention of Sudan. Perhaps it's because the Sudanese are black. Well then, why is there so little outrage in Yemen? They're a bit darker than Israelis. There's been horrific war for a decade, and most people are only vaguely aware of. Maybe it's the fault lines causing the conflict. Well, no, it's the same Iran-backed insurgents who tear this country apart as the Saudis bomb it back to the Stone Age to try and stop them. Perhaps it's a Muslim versus non-Muslim thing. Well, there was no great outcry, just despair and grumblings over Lebanon. Perhaps it's the scale of the war. Well, I didn't see marches over Syria. Perhaps it's the level of devastation. Well, the Chechens suffered 2 wars under Putin, and Grozny was levelled in a way that Gaza hasn't achieved yet. Perhaps it's the claimed targeting of hospitals and schools. Well, again, what about Assad and Putin in Syria? They did that to instill fear, not because terrorists had built military installations under the hospitals. Perhaps it's because so much land has been stolen from the Palestinians. Well, I don't see anyone marching against Jordan. Half their country was Palestine. Perhaps it's the ethnic cleansing. Well, I didn't see many marches for the Uyghurs. It did get a bit of TV coverage, little muted, let's not offend anyone. Could it be that the Jews haven't offered peace? Well, they deported all their own Jews. They even dug up the graves of their dead and relocated them so that they could provide the West Bank without them. Gaza is a political football. The Palestinians have been turned into eternal refugees by the Arab world and the UN. I don't believe that Israel is entirely faultless, but they did offer a 2-state solution, and they did commit to it. There were elections, and then there was a civil war when Hamas forces killed Palestinian opponents until they had total dominance in Gaza. Is it that they were given the land and left to it? Or the fighters were recruited with textbooks praising murder funded by the EU, and European countries funded the installation of the water pipes that Hamas dug up and turned into rockets? Could it be that everyone cares so much about the Palestinians because their suffering has been turned into a weapon, at the expense of everyday Palestinians, the world has offered them just one choice: fight Israel. Kidnap and violate young Israeli women, and you will be praised, given a house to live in, made a celebrity, given a wad of money. It's like a pension plan for life. Kill enough and be vicious enough, and you'll get to become rich and live in Qatar. Well, why did Hamas attack Israel? Because Iran wants to stir the pot and use useful idiots in the West to defend those suffering. They did it because they knew the IDF would respond with an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. It's like poking a tiger so it eats your village, and then you can get the money that comes in to help fix the village. I was planning to visit the Holy Land, and I had to cancel because of the attacks. I feel sorry for those on both sides who've suffered, but the public response is not about the suffering, it is revelling in that suffering. It is a perverse celebration that they got the result Iran desired, a West turning on Israel, the only tolerant democracy in the Middle East. I was recently accused of being a Zog mouthpiece. I don't know what the former president of Albania has to do with it, and he hasn't paid me a penny yet, so I'd like him to crack on. But this sort of conspiracy politics never dies because it's too profitable. So expect a little of a story of what happened to Israeli hostages. Some media might mention how many came back pregnant, but not many. Expect hand-wringing over the destruction of Gaza. Expect some help repairing it. Expect big wads of money for the repairs to disappear into bank accounts. Expect Arab countries to maintain a third generation of Palestinian refugees in camps in their countries without any chance of citizenship. Expect Iran to fund a military rebuild if they can. Expect the Palestinian Authority to try and gain ascendancy in both territories. Expect the five-star hotels to be built, the money from them to get nowhere near the people, and for photos of them to be nicely forgotten by the media. Expect the UN to return and help grease the wheels of the Palestinian suffering machine, not to solve the problems. Normally, when there's a war or a disaster, the United Nations, well, they have a High Commission for Refugees, and their refugee agency goes and helps refugees. But for whatever historical reasons, we don't have that in Palestine/Israel. What we have is UNRWA, and their job is to maintain the situation. Now, they can blame the Israelis, they can blame history, but effectively you have a UN organisation that runs half of the infrastructure, and its job isn't to end the problem. It's to make things a little better. But the system we've built is not to solve the problem, and it's not to give a two-state solution. And let's face it, one side doesn't want a two-state solution. So what else do I expect? I expect anti-Semitism in the UK and Europe to simmer. It's been awoken, it's been fed, and a new generation have been suckered on stories of atrocities and genocide and ethnic cleansing and being denied a homeland and not giving them any land, and it's their fault that there's terrorists, and a generation raised on how oppressed people are better have found a new oppression. It's reborn. The Queers for Palestine. How could you make anything funnier? Try that in Palestine. Go to Israel and you could be as gay as you want, as much as you want. That's where there's pride marches in the Middle East. You're not going to see pride marches in Gaza unless it's off the top of buildings. But what will happen in Sudan? Well, I expect silence. The truth is, their suffering is boring. There's always some suffering in Africa. They're not as sexy as the Palestinians. Maybe they're too black, or maybe they're being killed by the wrong people.